Good morning, children of class 6. Today I am going to send you a video on the Vedic civilization, and we are going to do the first part of Vedic civilization. I will send this video in 3 parts, and today is the first part. So now the Vedas and the Vedic literature. Now the Vedas are the earliest literary compositions in India. I told you in the last chapter, literary means anything connected with literature. And the Vedas were the earliest compositions. They were compiled in the form of literature in India. The Veda means knowledge. It is derived from the Sanskrit word with, which means to know. So from the Sanskrit word with, this word Veda comes and it means to know. Now there are 4 Vedas. They are the Rig Veda, the Sam Veda, the Yajur Veda and the Atharva Veda. Now, arising out of the Vedas are other literary compositions. Then again, from the Vedas, we have got other literary compositions which have been taken from the Vedic literature. These are called the Brahmanas, the Arankas, the Upanishads and the Purans. First, we have the 4 Vedas, which were the earliest literary compositions in India. And then after the 4 Vedas, we have other literary compositions which have been derived from the Vedas. They are the Arankas, the Brahmanas, the Upanishads and the Puranas. And also the epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata. We have read about the epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. So they have also been taken from the Vedic literature. Now the entire literature based on the Vedas is referred to as Vedic literature. Everything which we come to know about the Vedic life and about the Vedas, it is known as the Vedic literature. Every knowledge about the Vedas together is known as Vedic literature. Now, in Indian history, the period 1500 BC and 600 BC is called the Vedic age, as most of the information about this period is derived from the Vedic literature. This period is called the Vedic age between 1500 and 600 BC because most of the knowledge about this period is derived from the Vedic literature. During the Vedic age, a people called the Aryans, they settled in northern India. During the Vedic age, people who were called the Aryans, they settled in northern India. And the Aryans are so called. Why are the Aryans called Aryans? Because they speak one of the several Aryan languages that probably originated in Central Asia. They are called Aryans because the language which they spoke, the language which the Aryans spoke, it was called the Arya language which originated in Central Asia. India was named Bharatvarsh after a powerful Aryan tribe called Bharat. After a powerful Aryan tribe, India was named Bharatvarsh after a powerful Aryan tribe called Bharat. The Vedic age can be divided into the early Vedic period, that is 1500 to 1000 BC, and later Vedic period from 1000 to 600 BC. So it can be divided into 2 parts, the early Vedic period 1500 to 1000 BC and then later Vedic period from 1000 to 600 BC. So children, till now we have just read that the Vedas, they are the earliest literary compositions. They are 4 in number, and from the Vedas we derive the other religious texts like the Arankas, the Brahmanas, the Puranas, Upanishads and the 2 epics Ramayana and Mahabharata. And the Vedic age can be divided into 2 parts, the early Vedic age and the later Vedic age. And of course in India, in northern India, a very powerful tribe called Aryans who came from Central Asia. After their tribe, which was called Bharat, India has been named Bharatvarsh because of the powerful tribe which was called Bharat. After them, India has been named Bharatvarsh. Now we are going to read about the early Vedic period. Now the early Vedic period, people lived in a region called Sub-Sindhu. In the early Vedic period, the people, they lived in a region which was called Sub-Sindhu. Now Sub-Sindhu is the land of the 7 rivers, which is now modern Haryana and undivided Punjab at that time. Modern Haryana of these days and undivided Punjab of that time. It was watered by 7 rivers. It was watered by 7 rivers. That is why it is called Sub-Sindhu. Which were the 7 rivers? They were Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, Satluj and Saraswati. Okay, now the Saraswati river is not there. It has dried up. So, now in the early Vedic period, This region was called Sub-Sindhu, which is the land of 7 rivers. And we have just read about the rivers, which are the Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, Satluj and Saraswati, which has dried up. Now, the early Vedic age is also called the Rig Vedic age. The early Vedic age is also called the Rig Vedic age. Why? Because the Rig Veda was composed at this time. Why it is called the Rig Vedic age? Because the Rig Veda was composed at this time, and the Rig Veda is a very valuable source of information about the early Vedic period. It is a collection of 1028 hymns in praise of the gods. The Rig Veda, it is the earliest composition, it is the earliest Veda, and it is a composition of 1028 hymns sung in praise of God. Initially, it was not in the written form but was passed on orally. Initially, the Rig Veda was not written in the early stages. Whatever is there in the Rig Veda, at that time it was passed on orally. It means by word of mouth. Knowledge passed on this way is known as Shruti. Knowledge which is not written and which is passed on orally, it is known as Shruti. Now, the political division in the early Vedic period. Tribal divisions. In the early Vedic period, the Aryans were divided into tribal groups. Okay, in the early Vedic period, the Aryans, they were divided into small tribal groups, and each group lived in a village or gram. Each of this group, it lived in a village or gram, and the tribes were called cattle breeders. These tribes, they were basically cattle breeders. They were called cattle breeders. Now, what is breeder? What does the word breeder mean? Breeder means who keep animals for the youngs that they produce, who keep animals for the young ones whom they produce. So they were cattle breeders, and they fought wars over the possession of cattle and grazing grounds. So these tribes, they had wars over what? Over the possession of cattle and grazing grounds. Now, Rajan, he was the tribal chief, was called Rajan. He was the tribal chief and he was called Rajan, and he led his tribe in war and maintained law and order. This Rajan, he maintained his army, and he used to lead his army in war, and he also maintained law and order. He received a bali, which is a voluntary donation. He received bali, a voluntary donation. Voluntary means that anything, work done without any payment, work which is done without any payment, when you freely offer to do something. Voluntary means work which is done without payment, or you freely offer to do something. So this Rajan, he received a bali or voluntary donation for his services. The Rajan, he was assisted by the commander-in-chief. The Rajan, in his work, he was assisted by the commander-in-chief, the Senani, the chief priest, the Purohit, and the village headman called the Gramini. He consulted his subjects on important matters. Now, the Rajan, he consulted his subjects on important matters. He did this through the Sabha, a Samiti. Okay, he did this through the Sabha. It was a selected committee of village elders, and Samiti, the General Assembly. Okay, now the Rajan, he was the head. He led his army in war, and he also maintained law and order. And the Rajan was assisted in his work by the commander-in-chief, who was the Senani, and the chief priest, who was the Purohit, and the village headman was called the Gramini. He consulted his subjects on important matters. On important matters, he consulted his subjects. He did this through the Sabha, which is a small committee of selected village elders, and the Samiti, which was the General Assembly. So this was the political life during the early Vedic age. And then we have the life of the people, the life of the common people. Now, occupations, in this we are going to do the occupations and the amusements. Now, occupation means the work they did. Growing crops and rearing cattle were the main occupation of the Aryans. Growing crops and looking after cattle, rearing cattle was the main work of the Aryans. And the Aryans, they grew wheat, barley, and rice, and the cow was central to their lives. A man's honor was measured in terms of the number of cows he possessed. In the number of cows, he was known rich. He was known to be a rich man if he had lots of cow. The cows was also a unit of barter. Barter is good exchange for goods. If you had many cows, then you could exchange them for goods, and it was measured as a unit of barter. The Aryans used horses and chariots in war and peace. In war and peace, the Aryans used horses and chariots. In the later Vedic period, the horse became an important religious symbol. And during the early Vedic period, it was used in war and in peace, the horses and chariots. The Rig Veda mentions that there were craftsmen such as carpenters, chariot makers, weavers, leather workers, and potters. So these were the people who were working at that time. These were the main occupations. There were carpenters, chariot makers, weavers, leather workers, and potters. Now, amusements. The usual pastimes of the Aryans were chariot racing, hunting, gambling, music, and dancing. This amusement means that this is the way in which they entertain themselves. That is, in hunting, gambling, racing, music, and dancing. Musical instruments such as flutes, lutes, drums, and cymbals and harps were used at that time. So children, I hope you have understood till here. Please go through it. Tomorrow I will be starting with the second part of this chapter. We are going to do this much only today, and please, I will give you some meanings also of this part. Whatever means, just go through it, read it, and try to understand it. Thank you, and please stay safe. Bye bye.